They didn't just forget to check their bias at the door, they built an entire show around it. You tune in expecting a forensic dissection of a major geopolitical shift, and instead, you get a therapy session for the host. The villain here isn't the politician dodging the question, it's the interviewer who thinks his personal anxiety is far more important than facts. Trevor Phillips didn't want answers today, he wanted validation for his childhood trauma, and then when his guest didn't give it to him, he got petty. Usually the bias is subtle, it's a raised eyebrow, a loaded question or a framing device, but Trevor Phillips decided subtlety is for cowards. He starts the show with a disclosure. He tells us his family is from Guyana, Venezuela's neighbour. He tells us he grew up preparing for an invasion. Fine, context is good.
Forgive me if I begin 2026 on a personal note. To all intents and purposes, this morning, Venezuela is an American colony. I've got mixed feelings about that.
But then, the intro doesn't just frame the discussion, it leans hard into a verdict. It's not, here is a competing interpretations, it's this is what's really going on.
Whatever the White House says, I don't think this is really about drugs. It's about oil. Full disclosure, my family came to England from Guyana, the country next door to Venezuela. It's where I grew up and where I went to school. It's also where I learnt to handle a rifle. For almost 2 centuries, Venezuela has claimed more than half of Guyana's territory, the Essequibo region, as its own. My generation grew up preparing for an invasion. But I don't think anyone really thought we'd go to war over impenetrable rainforest. And then, in 2015, American companies hit oil in Guyanese waters. At 30 billion barrels, it's one of the biggest oil finds in decades. Unsurprisingly, Caracas immediately rediscovered its enthusiasm for Guyanese territory, even redrawing the map of Venezuela sent to every school to include Essequibo. So I don't think there's much doubt what is driving Mr. Trump's military adventure. He wants to protect America's vast oil interests in the region and to feed his refineries with Venezuelan crude. And if that means upsetting the international rules-based order, I don't think Mr. Trump will be too bothered. After all, American presidents, including Democrats like Kennedy and Obama, have always been clear on one thing. The first rule of the rules-based order is that America makes the rules to suit America.
And then he uses it as a bludgeon to beat his guests until they agree with his specific worldview. First, he goes after Darren Jones. Now, Jones is doing the standard government dance. We need to see the details. It's an American operations, standard stuff. But Phillips isn't interested in his government's position. He wants Jones to say one specific word. He asks, are we now in favour of colonialism?
Colonialism? Are we now in favour of colonialism?
We're not in favour of colonialism, and we're not entirely clear yet what President Trump meant by those comments yesterday.
No, he's pretty clear. He says, we're in charge until we decide otherwise.
Sure, but it's for the Americans now and for Venezuela to set out what happens in the coming days. As the Prime Minister said yesterday, we shouldn't make assumptions or guess what might happen next in certain hypothetical scenarios.
You don't have to make any assumption. President Trump has been pretty clear. He said, we are going to run Venezuela. We will decide when we can stop running Venezuela and pass on power in his word was, judicious way. It's pretty clear. We must have a view on that, surely.
But we don't know the shape, the timescale, the details of that. And as I say, we don't know yet.
So colonialism is all right as long as it's in the right form?
No, that's not what I said. All I said is...
Well, it is what you said.
No, it's not what I said. What I said is we don't know the details yet of what's happening in Venezuela. And it would be wrong for government ministers to try to make assumptions or to comment on hypotheticals about the future. We're engaging with our counterparts. Of course we are. Our embassy is working in Venezuela. But we should understand what's going to happen next before we comment. That's what the public would expect of a grown-up professional government to do.
No, I don't think so. I think the public would expect a grown-up government to be consistent, because I suspect if it had been anybody but the Americans, as in the case of Russia, if the Chinese did something similar in the Pacific, you would say exactly what you said about Putin, but we don't seem to be able to say this about America.
Jones doesn't bite, so Phillips asks again. And again. He tries to trap him. You made a judgment that Putin's invasion of Ukraine was unlawful. What's the difference about this? When Jones correctly points out that the international courts handle that, Phillips snaps. He tells the Chief Secretary to the Treasury that the public expects a grown-up government.
What would happen if they decided, and he was pretty clear about this too, when he was asked about Cuba, what would we be saying if this were not Venezuela, but Cuba, or Panama, or Greenland? Is it sort of okay for our allies to waltz in wherever they think they need to snatch somebody who's done something naughty?
So, Trevor, I think a lot of the basis of your previous two questions, again, are around assumptions of things that may or may not happen in the world. I can't go through all of those.
They're about what Mr. Trump told the world yesterday.
No. I think you're pushing them to the extreme there. As I say, the UK respects international law and the rules-based order. We are an advocate for it.
Can you cite any element of any international convention or law that gives the United States permission to go to a foreign country, abduct its president and his wife, recognised, by the way, by other countries, and take them to an American jail? What piece of international law supports that action?
Look, I'm not qualified to give an answer to that
Prime
question.
Minister said he supports international law. He must have been pretty clear what he had in mind. And he hasn't told you what he has in mind?
Neither of us will make judgments on that question. It's for the Americans to set out the legal basis for their operations. We are not spokespeople for the American administration, Trevor. We're spokespeople for the UK government.
I'm asking you not about the operations. I'm asking you about what the Prime Minister said about what we think as a country. He was clear. He supports international law. And I'm just saying, asking you, what element of international law can you imagine supports this particular action?
You're asking me what the legal basis for the American operation was. I'm not a spokesperson for the American administration. Okay. It's for them to set that out.
See, the trick, if you don't share Trevor's emotional reaction, you don't get to view this through the lens of a Guyanese schoolboy fearful of invasion. You aren't just wrong, you're childish. Then he brings in Priti Patel. Patel is arguably the most hawkish person that he interviews. She looks at the US taking over Venezuela and basically says, well, they took out a drug dealer. And the national security strategy said they'll do it.
Points to make, Trevor, to be quite frank. And, you know, the world sort of watched yesterday, I think, this big jaw-dropping moment, but failed to recognise that the United States of America under President Trump has been really putting together one hell of an armada out around Venezuela, taking out serious boats that have all been involved in illegal, illicit drug trade and trafficking. And I was in Washington in November when the national security strategy was released, and I'm afraid there are a lot of people in Britain, Europe, that basically almost sort of were quite, shrill and churlish about the strategy, where it clearly said that President Trump was going to be asserting American influence. And you've already mentioned, I think David did as well, your Washington correspondent, about, the Roosevelt corollary and the history, the Monroe Doctrine. That national security strategy was crystal clear that America under Trump was going to assert itself when it came to issues of chronic wrongdoing that were having a big impact on the United States.
She's analysing the strategy. She's cold. She's clinical. Phillips can't handle it. Because he's emotional, he assumes that she must be too. He accuses her of being enthusiastic. He says, straightforwardly, you'd think this was a good thing. Applause for the White House. Patel shuts him down, says, well, I've given you context.
You sound rather enthusiastic about this. Straightforwardly, you think this was a good thing, well executed. Applause for the White House.
First of all, I've just given you the context around what America chose to do, what President Trump chose to do. For those of us that have been following this, it's pretty clear that was the direction of travel. The execution, I think we should just recognise this. It happened very quickly, and the Americans, the government are clearly, we're all watching this, and we only know what was said yesterday. We're now watching this from the ultimate implications of what this means.
I wasn't asking you for a commentary on it. I was asking you whether you support it or not.
She's talking geopolitics. He's talking feelings. He wants her to admit that she's happy about colonialism, so he can attack her for it. When she refuses to play that game, he gets frustrated. He claims that she's reluctant to say whether she thought this was a good idea. No, Trevor, she told you exactly what she thought. She just didn't like the tone because it doesn't match your panic.
And
Well,
it sounds
look,
like
the
you do.
fact that Maduro is gone, we absolutely support. This guy was an oppressive tyrant. He was a
In this
complete
way? In this
dictator. He was
fashion?
responsible for all sorts of terrible things. And I think that's welcome. The Americans are now going to go through their own process in terms of how this is handled. And clearly there's a court indictment now against Maduro and his wife. And it's interesting from a legal perspective.
For a
they're
straight-talking
focusing on the
Essex
drugs.
MP, you seem to be reluctant to say whether you thought this was a good idea, a good thing to do or not.
Just said, no one's going to cry over the fact that Maduro has gone.
But the mask truly slips with Richard Tice. Phillips tries the Putin comparison again. Mr. Putin says they're fascists and Nazis in Ukraine. Mr. Trump says that we need to remove this bad guy. He's desperate for Tice to say, yes, Trevor, Trump is just like Putin.
But Mr. Putin would make exactly the same point. He says that he is threatened by NATO's advance to his borders under Ukraine, and he makes exactly the point you've just made.
Apples and pears, nonsense, Trevor. He wanted to invade the whole of Ukraine and to keep it. President Trump has made it quite clear this is an illegitimate.
We're going to run Venezuela until we decide we don't want to.
Until a successful, peaceful transition to a
going
democratically
to
elected.
transition is over?
Well, the challenge is to prevent chaos descending into Venezuela. That's the key point.
Tice isn't having it. He calls it apples and pears nonsense and points out Putin wanted to keep Ukraine, whereas Trump claims he'll leave. Now, you can agree with Tice or not. That's not the point. The point is Tice dismantled Trevor's premise and, well, he just kind of breaks him. He doesn't counter with a fact. He gets all personal. He mocks Tice about his position in the Reform Party.
Mr. Putin says there are fascists and Nazis in Ukraine that threaten our borders.
Trevor,
we're going to remove
it's
them.
chalk and cheese. There is no comparison whatsoever.
Well, that's because you want it to be.
No, there's no comparison. Putin has never said he was going to give Ukraine back to the Ukrainians. He just wanted to get rid of
and
Zelensky.
Mr. Trump has not yet said
different. He literally said it yesterday.
Okay. All right. One thing clear. Am I talking to a future Reform Chancellor if you were fortunate enough to be in government?
Well, ultimately, the boss decides, but you hopefully are talking to someone who is part of a Reform government after the next generation.
So he hasn't promised you...
The sooner that happens, the better.
He hasn't promised you the Treasury yet?
Well, the great thing is that there are many talents in Reform UK, and we all do a range of jobs. We're talking about foreign policy this morning.
I'm utterly baffled that the Deputy Leader, a big fish like you, hasn't been told by the party leader the Chancellorship is yours.
I don't share everything with you on a Sunday morning, Trevor.
I mean, look at that. He loses on the Trump and Putin logic, so he essentially says, well, Nigel Farage hasn't promised you a job yet. That's not an interview. That's a man in a pub losing an argument and resorting to, your mum. It's petty, it's small, and it reveals that this wasn't about getting answers. It was about Trevor Phillips winning the moral high ground. We talk a lot about impartiality in this country, but what we saw today wasn't impartiality. It wasn't even good opinion journalism. It was a main character syndrome. Phillips looked at a massive shift in global power, the US effectively annexing South American nation, and decided the most important angle was how it made him feel about his childhood. And when the guests didn't want to join in his pity party, he lashed out. Journalism's supposed to be the first draft of history. This was just the first draft of Trevor's diary.